and welcome to the Planet Zoo Every Animal Franchise Zoo. We're back again. I've added a bunch of new habitats to the zoo, and it's been a rather ape-heavy building session for the habitats this week. There's also some more exhibit animals and a few more African animal additions too. But before we even go there, there's something we need to talk about. It's the crowds. I'd say in the space of maybe 3 or 4 extra habitats that we've added, the crowd situation has gone crazy. I'm not talking like an extra couple of 100 people. There is an extra couple of 1,000 people turned up to the zoo. And alas, that is making it very difficult to record because the FPS is dropping already with those numbers. Actually, if I turn on the user interface, we can see here there is just over 7,000 guests in the zoo at this current time. And honestly, this wouldn't be a problem if they spaced themselves out, but they are insistent on crowding around this corner. It's absolutely crazy. Now, I guess I appreciate some of that is because this is where the entrance is and guests have to come in and leave from the same entrance. So yeah, obviously it's to be expected you're going to get bigger crowds around here, but look at this. It's absolutely nuts. Oh, and of course the vending machine's broken down just as I'm going past it. I wouldn't be surprised if someone vandalized it. There's a lot of that going around as well. Anyway, you may have noticed, to ease the congestion here, I've added an additional path. And it is working as intended. It has eased the traffic flow a little bit, but I'm tired of feeling like this is parade time on Main Street in Disney. That's what it feels like, the number of crowds we're getting. It's nuts. So as of today, I'm going to drop it down to a maximum of 3,000 guests and see how we get on. Right, with that out the way, what are we going to be doing today? First up, we have a walkthrough habitat going in this space here for all 3 lemurs. All 3 of them can be housed together. I'm just hoping there's enough room for something big enough. So this is the first walkthrough enclosure that we've added into the zoo. We've added a couple of other creatures like the prairie dog that could have had a walkthrough enclosure, but because they were housed with other animals that couldn't have walkthrough enclosures, that's just how things have played out. The design of this habitat that I'm creating is going to be completely enclosed. To get the shape of this, I'm building out the supports first, so basically the skeleton of the building. I find it slightly easier to build this way for buildings that aren't on the grid. So anything with a custom roof, I personally find it easier to build out the structure than just fill in the gaps with panels. Once this was mostly filled in with the solid bits, I've added the walk-through doors. I've gone with 2 sets of doors on the presumption the guests are going to just walk through one side and straight out through the other side. However, I'm fully aware Planet Zoo has a mind of its own, and it's likely the guests are going to come in one door and then try and exit from the same door, so there might be a bit of a traffic jam in here if we're unlucky. Terrain-wise, all 3 of the lemurs hail from Madagascar, and that's a tropical climate, so the terrain requirements was really pushing heavily on soil again. Fine by me, I quite enjoy doing the habitats that require a lot of soil. Rockwork in this enclosure I've kept quite minimal because I was conscious that we didn't have a lot of space and I don't want the poor lemurs to be complaining about not having enough space because they can't navigate the terrain, which always happens when you put rocks in. I have got a few in, and at the back here I've got a shelter within the shelter again, just like we did for the Arctic wolves and the Arctic foxes. Another reason I've put this one in here is because this is a walkthrough enclosure. I want to give the lemurs somewhere to escape if they start getting stressed out. That's not really something you have to worry about when it's not a walkthrough enclosure, because I tend to put that one-way glass in if I know the animal's shy. The lemurs aren't shy, but the volume of visitors going in there, they may potentially get stressed if it's too many. In terms of plants and fauna, the lemurs like a lot of coverage. You can go up to 100% coverage if you want to. I was still kind of restricted because of the space restrictions, so I have added as much as I can without affecting how much space they have to navigate around. So here it is, our lemur walkthrough experience. It just about fitted into the space allocated, thankfully. I've put in all of the education boards on the outside of the habitat. I feel like it doesn't make a difference if it goes in or not, and it just blocks the view if you put it inside. Already got some guests walking through, so I think it is going to be quite popular. Lemurs are pretty happy. Haven't had any problems with the guests and the lemurs interacting so far, although I have added those be quiet signs just in case. What else is there in here? Oh yeah, shout out to 6 Birds in a Trench Coat who commented on my last video about the feeding platform issue. Keepers can can reach the feeding platform when it's raised if you add a ramp. So that's what we've done in this enclosure. So thank you for the suggestion. I do read and take on board comments, and if it's something I can implement in the zoo, I will do. Right, so I think we're ready to move on to the next animal. Let's get the data up. Next up is, well, it's on Bongo, but before that we've got the Boa Constrictor. If you watched last week's episode, I've already put in the habitat box for that animal. That's attached to the African themed restaurant that we made last week. So we'll put that aside for now. The next habitat animal is the Bongo. Bongo is another African antelope, and only 2 of them needed in the habitat for the social needs, and they don't take up a lot of room. So where are we going to put them? I've picked out this space behind the capuchin monkeys and the bird's tapir. I think this will suit nicely. So Bongo, quite a nice simple habitat again. They really don't need a lot of room, no difficult terrain requirements. For these, they are tropical animals, so I've gone with that wooden fence idea again. So log wall at the back and the guest barrier at the front. That's made of logs, wood pieces, and I've used one-way glass because the bongos are incredibly shy. For the hard shelter in here, because the bongos really don't take up a lot of room, I've gone with something really simple for this one. Basically a wood shed. The simple shed though, that alone didn't cover the animal's hard shelter needs, so what I've built as well, I created a little cover for the feeding station for them. That meets the requirements and breaks the space up a little bit in the enclosure. As with the lemurs, the bongos like a lot of coverage when it comes to the plants, so I've accommodated for as much as that as allowable within the space. So this is the bongo habitat in action. Squeeze the education boards into the corner here so it's not blocking the view, and here are the bongos themselves. Very cute, adorable animals. I think these guys are my favourite antelope in the game. So yeah, not really a lot to say about the bongo enclosure. Just a nice, relatively simple animal to work with. The one-way barrier in action. A godsend that we have that panel piece now, so you can make custom barriers that work for shy animals. Next up, we'll be creating a habitat for the first great ape in the zoo so far, the bonobo. Bonobos, they're one of those animals that need a moderate amount of space, about 1,000 meters squared. So space-wise, I am looking at this corner, but we have something else coming up very soon that I think is going to need that space more than the bonobos. Oh, and of course we get day to night changeover. It's better, I can see again. Bonobos, I think I can fit them in here right next to the bongos. I think I can work with this space. For the bonobos, I had to use some reference material again. I had to look at some real-life bonobo habitats, see how the real world was doing it. And based on my research, I've gone back to an old favourite, the old breeze block wall. I know some of you aren't keen on the breeze block. It is a bit concretey, but it's so handy. Also, we're having the keeper hut right at the back there. It's integrated with the wall really well. Feels like it's meant to be part of the enclosure. For the hard shelter, for this enclosure, I've gone with a dual hard shelter, so there's one on both sides at the front of the barrier. 2 reasons for this. Firstly, I just like the symmetry of it. It's something a bit different than anything I've built before. I used the technique of putting the hard shelter up against the guest barrier quite a lot. It's very useful for getting good views, but I haven't done it where it's this double shelter before. The second reason is, well, apes are quite intelligent animals, so I've split out and there's going to be one area for the sleeping quarters and the other shelter is going to be for activities, so that's where I'll put some of the enrichment items and the feeding station. The mesh barrier, that's a custom barrier stolen from the Bengal tiger habitat that we've already built. I measured the height for this and the height of it fits in perfectly with what the bonobos need. I'll put my hands up and admit, yeah, this isn't very realistic because a bonobo would be straight up that. They would be able to climb it, but the game counts the mesh pieces as unclimbable, so I'm making use of that. Here they are going in, quite small really compared to what I thought they'd be. For the terrain, it's quite interesting actually, because the real life examples that I looked at were full of grass. It was just pure grass. Very little soil, and there was no vegetation from what I could see on the pictures that I looked at for reference. In-game, the bonobos need quite a lot of soil, and they also do have some vegetation requirements as well, and I'm nothing but accommodating, so of course I've worked that into the habitat design. Bonobos do have quite extensive climbing needs that you need to accommodate for, so for this habitat I decided giving making my own custom climbing frame a go this time round. Normally I try and steer clear of making climbing frames because they never tend to come out that well, and when they do, it takes a long time for me to develop them. This one did take a long time actually to get it right, I will say that. I based this off of ones that I saw on the pictures from real life bonobo enclosures, and the way they have their climbing frames, they are built on like a little bit of a hill, and it's these big tree trunk structures mixed with wooden beams to support it. So I basically just tried to replicate that with my one here. I think it worked out okay in the end. Certainly not a work of art, but it looks like something you might find in an enclosure like this. Here's the final build. I've built a little shelter into the gap in the path where the education board is. A good tip for franchise modes: when you're building the enclosures, build a little side path off the main path, and the traffic isn't as bad then with the flow of guests. As you can see here, the final climbing frames, the bonobos love them and they use them frequently, so really happy about that. I did have to put 2 in because 1 wasn't enough to cover all of their needs, so I just copied and pasted it. Oh, got one here going right up to the fence. And of course it starts raining, so we're going to have difficulty seeing. Just my luck. We'll carry on and hopefully, fingers crossed, the FPS doesn't drop too badly. Right, shall we take a look inside the shelters? Yeah, let's do that. So this is the sleeping shelter. And if we go over to the other one over this side, this is the activity shelter. Oh, and we've got a bonobo in here looking out the window at the rain. Oh, how adorable is that? Wouldn't life be glorious if we could all do that? Just sit and contemplate life whilst you're staring out the window at the rain. Yeah, it's really coming down now. I wonder if they're programmed to do that, to sit at the window when it rains, or are they just doing that because they would do that anyway? Who knows? Very cool if that is the reason though. Right, well, I think we'll leave the bonobos to the rain and we'll look at what we need to do for the next habitat. Next up, coincidentally, we have another ape. It's the Bornean Orangutan. Orangutans get to share their habitat. They can share with a couple of animals, but since we've already added the Asian otter and the Malayan tapir, it's just the Siamang that's left. So this will be a joint habitat for both of those apes. Indeed, this is what I've been saving this other corner for, because the Siamangs and the orangutans together take up quite a bit of room. They'll benefit from having more space in this corner than the bonobos would have done. In terms of the design for this habitat, it's a mixture of some new ideas, but also relying quite a bit on some of the older habitats that I've created over the years. The hard shelter here, this is a template that I've created for the simple habitat series. This building's one that I've blueprinted and I use it quite frequently for monkeys and apes. Little fiddly getting a square building onto a curved corner, but we got there in the end. Climbing frame in this enclosure, also one that I've built in a previous build, so blueprinted that and using it here because I do love this climbing frame. The mixture of using the climbing poles and the ropes, I think it looks quite realistic. Something else I like to do is have a climbing pole going inside the hard shelter. You see that in real life where they'll have ropes and stuff for the animals to get through, and because these animals will use it, I like the idea of putting that just through the hole there. Inside the hard shelter, something new I've done, not done this before, is having a beam and then hanging ropes off the beam. I get the feeling this is something you might see in real life, but alas, in the game, I don't think the apes will go up this because there's nowhere for them to go on top of it. But it looks good and it counts as meeting their climbing needs, so I'm going to leave it in there for now and see what happens. So here we are, finished habitat for combined habitat for the orangutan and the Siamang. Fairly big habitat, not one of the biggest, but fairly substantial in size. Here's one of our orangutans now, going for a stroll. Oh, and Siamang is using the climbing frame. Yay! And they're not doing any weird acrobatics getting up there. That's a bonus. One way to make you feel like a winner in Planet Zoo, you build a climbing frame and they use it the right way. As you can see here, in the end, I had to use quite a lot of flora and fauna in here because the Siamangs are very fussy about that. They like a lot of coverage. Orangutans, they can take it or leave it, but it was for the Siamang's benefit, all of the trees and stuff. terms of guest viewing, it's good on two sides. There isn't a bad angle to be viewing the animals in this enclosure from. Inside the hard shelter, we've got the sleeping platform up at the back here. Then the rest are taken up by enrichment items and more of those climbing frames. I do love the hanging ropes, even if they don't use them. I think it's a good prop there. Anyway, onwards and upwards, we need to power on to the next animal, which is an exhibition species. Actually, it's two exhibition species. We've got two spiders, Brazilian salmon pink tarantula and the Brazilian wandering spider. In terms of where we're putting these two, we've got this convenient gap over here. This is an ideal space for exhibit animals here because it's too close to the buildings behind it to get a habitat species in there. As I always do with exhibit animals, I'm going to fit in some more amenities here, so maybe a shop or two, some toilets. I'm going to build that off camera and I'll jump cut back when it's done. So here we go, a new combined facilities block and exhibit space. Theming wise, these are both South American tropical animals, so I've gone with that rainforesty tropical vibe here. For the shop, I decided to add a gift shop here, and I'm glad I did. It's very popular already. Queues out the door, keeping the vendor on their toes there. For decorations, I repurposed the stuff we already created for the centipedes across the way, just adjusted it a little bit to suit this building. Now, it wouldn't be fair not to take a look at the spiders, so if you're squeamish about spiders, you might want to look away now. The tarantula, looking very cozy there in the leaves. Nothing scary about them at all. Here's the wandering spiders. Let's see if we can find them. A little bit harder to see these. Don't think they're at the front. Gonna have to look around the back. There you are. Ah, just a spider. Nothing to freak out about. Yet again, guests might be a little upset that they can't see anything back there. But it's kind of true to life, isn't it? I've often gone to the zoo and you're looking in the exhibit box and you can't see a thing. That's kind of how it goes, isn't it? Anyway, next to the exhibit, I've got another washroom in. We've got one over the way, but my new rule is always put two in together. For some reason in franchise mode, you need two whenever you're putting washrooms down. So that's the exhibit boxes in. Oh, and before I forget, we're going to go over and take a look at the boa constrictor because I forgot to do that before and I know I will get comments saying, "Where's the boa?" if I don't do that. So let's go and take a quick look over there. So here we are, over by the restaurant. We have the new boa constrictor exhibit. And for once, I'm not having to play hide and seek to find them. They're right there. Both of them enjoying wrapping themselves around the tree. I always like seeing the exhibit animals sitting together. Sometimes they don't really interact at all. So yeah, that's really nice to see. And there you go, showed you the boa. To that end, we've actually worked our way through all of the bee animals in the zoo. Next episode, we're moving on to the seas, starting with the California sea lion. So I'm excited about that. Definitely want to try and do something special for the sea lions. Maybe it's time to get an educator into the zoo. We've got this far without any educators, so maybe it's time to look into that. Hope you've enjoyed what we've added today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.